It is the year 2008. IDW Comics was undergoing transitions and increased Hasbro influence. In an effort to boost sales, Denton, sales are totally dropping and we can absolutely prove it, please don't check the sales record, Tipton, made the decision to ditch the intricate storytelling of the Simon Furman era in favour of something more akin to Basplosions! Australian writer Shane McCarthy entered, not only kicking off this soft reboot, but also working under the first signs of the influence of that guy at Hasbro, with the most severe mandates they'd seen in the comics since they murdered the entire cast to sell new toys in the 80s. Alongside this book ran a miniseries tying up Simon Furman's loose ends that still has the best Dynabot designs, I don't care what you say, and a new series of spotlights touching on exciting things like child murder or parental abandonment. The reception of this series led to a follow-up vignette run under the auspice of incoming editor Andy Schmitty Schmidt, who I'm sure the fandom would embrace. All this and Kawaii Dorifto-shan could be found in the year-long run of All Hail Megatron.
Welcome to Moonbase 2.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a show that has got to be cursed, because I'm recording it in the middle of the night. Arranging it with these gentlemen has been, are you both actually the same person trying to make it difficult on me? And I got times wrong again. Otherwise known as our IDW Retrospective episode 2, where we're talking about the All Hail Megatron era, the first major shift in the IDW comics. With me today from Transmissions, we have a man who is a beast from Cybertron, a Cybertronian Beast. It's Darryl.
Hi. How are you?
Good.
That's a nice intro. I'd never been introduced as just a beast, but that's I'll use that.
Having seen pictures of you, I don't believe that.
Oh,
I would. If if you can't believe the words of an Irishman who's been awake for 10 minutes, who can you trust? And also with me is Scott from the Seibertron Twincast.
Hello out there.
Do you prefer Scott or Scotty or...
ScottyP is usually how I go for this sort of thing, but I mean Scott's fine too.
Well, Scott, but hey, it's your name. ScottyP sounds like a good one. So nice bunch of lads here. So, gentlemen, as I started with the last show, Scotty, we'll start with you. What was your introduction to sort of Transformer comics in general and IDW in particular?
Yeah, so the comics in general, I was a little bit of a young for G1, being born in 85. I guess I just dated myself, but anyhow. So I was into the comics in the very, very late Marvel G1 run, only then being old enough to really understand what I was reading, and that being the only new media available other than more hand-me-down videotapes of the cartoons and things like that. So was always... really enjoyed that part of the comics. That later Marvel US part is kind of classic at this point. All those Simon Furman stories, really dug those for what I could find of them. Anybody who was alive then knows some of those in the 70s. Good luck finding them at a newsstand, even if you could time travel. So always kind of enjoyed the comics, but they were more of a secondary thing for me. Even when IDW started, I started with, I had a copy of Infiltration Zero in October 2005 and just read them from there. Had a little brief hiatus in the material that'd be in the episode after this one for your retrospective during the Costa run, and then really kind of came back just before Phase 2 and got really, really hooked in and kind of circled back around and dived in a bit more into the Phase 1 stuff again. So that's the quick version.
Okay, Darryl, what about you?
Oh boy. I got into comics like wholesale when I was around 12. And I remember there was 2 comic stores in my town. One I remember going into, and there were a small stack of comics that were Transformers on a small table. This place also sold like used books and stuff, whatever. And I remember just picking them up, and there was maybe, I don't know, a half a dozen or so on the table. And I bought them all there, and I still have those as part of my G1 run. Those individual books, they're beat up pretty good, but the nostalgia of having those individual books. So there weren't any, runs in there or anything. They were just random issues. And then slowly but surely I did piece together all 80 issues. But I remember after all that had ended, I had moved to the city I'm in now, a larger city, and found another store that was actually selling the Dreamwave books as they were coming out. And I was a little late, maybe about, I found issue 1 of the first series in 3rd printing. And so I picked that up, and that's kind of where it started for me again. But basically, I've been hooked on the Transformers books ever since. I never really got into the offshoots like the Armada or the Beast Wars books, but the mainline G1-esque books I was whole hog on, and really enjoyed those. So I've pretty much been reading them ever since. And as far as Transformers go, I've been a fan since the get-go.
I will say in that regard, with Dreamwave stuff, I'd actually say Armada's stuff was more worthwhile than the G1. So it's the art's still Dreamwave art, but it might not be a bad one to check out if you ever get the chance.
It's good, but don't do the IDW Omnibus reproduction. It's really dark, and it doesn't look good because the pages had that black base to them. So that's one that it's really cheap to just track the floppies down on eBay. I would go that route, or the old trades.
And some people say read Energon, and I just I didn't think it was very good.
It was starting to, and then it's just over.
So we did because Dave and Chris McFeely were doing Dreamwave reviews, and they never made it to the Armada Energon stuff, but oh god, that company. But yeah, I won't go over my one again, but I will say this is when I became an active reader. Before All Hail Megatron, I was playing catch up. I had just discovered Transformers comics in general. I'm the same age as Scotty, but I was just never into comics because you just couldn't get them here. Middle of nowhere, rural Ireland, but I just moved to England. So I had a comic book shop near me, so I used to call down there quite a bit. So I caught up on the entire Asian series, and then I went back and bought the Marvel stuff online, and bought some Dreamwave online. But All Hail Megatron was the first buy as it comes out Transformers comic for me. So this actually has a very special place in my heart, this series, for all its controversy. But so let's, what is All Hail Megatron? The Asian era, Simon Furman's era, was coming to an end largely because sales were dropping. At the time, they were just saying, it's a bit impenetrable, but it's very deep into its own mythology. Ergo, we want to make something a bit more streamlined. Editor Andy Schmitty himself, he would come back several years later and say that people like Denton J. Tipton had wildly exaggerated the success of the Asian era and how rapidly sales had dropped off. And that All Hail Megatron was vastly needed to make sure that the company kept going with the franchise. How much you can believe that is a little up and down. And Andy Schmidt did tend to put his foot in his mouth, as we'll see when we finally touch on Continuum. But for this series, they brought in Shane McCarthy, who had written a couple of DC stories, including one that reinvented the Riddler. And for art, they brought in Guido Guidi, who was a very popular fan who'd done some cover work, I believe, at this stage. And he had done a spotlight or two. But it was very different from the Asians. A lot of the unique aspects of the IDW continuity, the structure of the war, some of the concepts like Ultra Energon, they were, for most of the series, completely removed. There were references later on, but it was trimmed down vastly. The art style was changed from E.J. Sue's stylistic approach to largely the cartoon on paper approach to things. And overall, it's been compared to sort of a summer blockbuster film. It was also highly controversial at the time. And I, being the idiot little child I was at, in 2008, was running around going I'm contributing by saying stupid stuff on the internet, and I think Shane McCarthy might actually hate me now. But it was controversial for losing the elements. It was controversial for some of the character work. Drift caused a lot of backlash. In all honesty, more than he ever deserved. So it was an interesting time to be in the fandom. But Darryl, when I asked you about this, you actually said you would defend All Hail Megatron to the hilt. So we're just going to open your overall opinion of the main 12-issue maxi series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually really enjoyed going back and rereading that 12-issue series, just because I honestly I don't count the 4 issues that come at the end of it, even though they do put them in the miniseries. But right off the bat, the first 3 issues of that thing are just explosive, and it gets you right into the threat of the Decepticons right off the bat, and I loved it. I those first 3 issues were fantastic. It slows down to a crawl, issues 4 through 10.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not super quick. There's a lot of exposition to go through. They're cleaning up the Asians, what happened in the Asians, and they're figuring out what they're going to do with characters that were really, dealt with harshly. Sunstreaker, right, is a big issue there. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with him in those issues. They're introducing new human characters, Spike as one that will become integral in the ongoings that Barbara writes later on. But again, at the end of the series, issues 11 and 12, it closes out as the climax, like you had mentioned, as a blockbuster movie. Just another battle royale of fighting, which, if anyone's listened to Transmissions, is what I just adore in comics. A big frickin' fight, metal on metal, just beating the crap out of each other. I loved it. But those middle issues where it just slows to a crawl was great. Although there was a couple times where Starscream gets real Starscreamy, and there was a point, and I can't remember what exact issue it was in, but Megatron controls him. And it's beautiful writing by Shane McCarthy, where Megatron tells Starscream, the Decepticons will be yours one day. You will have to take them from me, but they will be yours. I have no doubt. But as of right now, I need you for this. They are not yours now. They will be someday. And it gets Starscream in line. He is not playing at the moment. But he falls in line after that little, pull to side, and it was beautiful because he gets on the horn and gathers the Seekers behind him and goes to town. But it's I really like the way that the book starts, or the series starts, and it ends. It has issues in the middle. I'll give everyone that, but it starts great and it ends phenomenally.
Scotty, what about you?
Yeah, when this came out, I actually really liked it. And I still do, going back on the rereading. I agree with a lot of what Darryl just mentioned. And I was looking for that part with Megatron and Starscream, because that is really good. I think that was in issue 10 or late in issue 9. I'm flipping through the hardcover, so it's a little tough to tell. I got the Phase 1 Volume 5 hardcover out to go back through it. So, yeah, that was a really nice part. And I think what this did at the time was, it was really interesting to kind of look at the publication schedule, because that really jogged my memory of sort of what the issues people were beginning to have with the Asians material and with what Furman was doing. And then, with this coming in, it felt like a soft reboot. And honestly, going back and looking at the schedule where it's, I think, I just had it pulled up. Let me get into that tab over here. So this All Hail Megatron 1 came out a week before Revelation Part 2.
Oh.
And All Hail Megatron 2 came out the same day as Revelation Part 3, which is Spotlight Double Dealer. So it really, in those ways, felt especially like a soft reboot, because you think about what's going on in those and what's going on in the early parts of All Hail Megatron. They have nothing to do with one another. And you see Sunstreaker, and he's just fine. And then later you see Reflector, and he's just fine. This was before the John Barber time-hopping retcon stuff that occurred. So, okay. And especially with Reflector, he had just died in Spotlight Wheelie not long before. So it was almost like, is this new? Is it not? And by the middle, we learned that, no, it isn't. It's still part of that same universe. But I think what it did that was well-timed is this was the 25th anniversary. And a lot of Furman's material had been sort of just meandering. You were waiting to see where it was going with the Nova Prime stuff. And it was like this constant build, and you couldn't, I think it was losing focus of where it wanted to go. Maybe it was a little overambitious. I enjoyed it. But it was just sort of chaotic to keep up with it all and where all the placements were of what was happening where with all the spotlights. And this, with that 25th anniversary happening and Revenge of the Fallen hype was really big. Because this is middle of 2008 it comes out, so it's in between. 07 movie, massive success. Revenge of the Fallen, massive success from a financial standpoint. It's the movie itself. And it really kind of pulled on that like nostalgia boner, for lack of a better word, right? You have this very Sunbow G1 Decepticon invasion, but they're actually really bad guys. But you look at that cast, right? It's like G1 cartoon cast, season 1, plus some Astro Train and Blitzwing. And it did just a nice, fun job of pulling that in with, as was mentioned, that different art style. And it was very exciting. It was, again, those first 3-4 issues, very coherent. Really, really got hooked by that first part of the series as it came out. I never actually finished this when it was initially published, because I didn't have a comic shop by, I think 9 or 10 was the last single that I got, so I never got to read the ending for 6 months to a year or something like that, combined with being busy with life and job stuff and just sort of starting to trail off with it, but not give it up entirely, following Transformers comics at the time. I was a big fan of it when it came out. I think it was a shot in the arm that was needed. I didn't go back and look at sales numbers to see if it was, but
apparently it steadied out. The way some people described it, it brought in a lot of new readers, but it didn't bring it above the Asian time. It just sort of evened it out.
Yeah. I could see that. That's fair. And I think if you were a fan of the more sci-fi myth arc, slow build, slow burn that Furman was doing, this was a very jarring transition. And it did sort of, and I think McCarthy, I don't know if he said this or if this is me imagining he said this, but when people would complain about him ignoring continuity and things like that, I want to say his reaction was something like, I was just doing what they wanted me to do.
Yeah. I was looking into it earlier on today, and it was such an early time before we really realized how much influence Hasbro had in it and how much the editorial had in it. And then you had the writer, and we all just sort of put everything on him. And the things that either editorial or Hasbro made a call on to change this, like the fact that really it's relatively small scale. We do see a bit of the world in it. We see Beijing, we see Israel, but most of it's all set in New York, and that's because Hasbro put down the edict. They didn't want the Decepticons going on a rampage across the planet. They just keep it in New York. And, Sunstreaker storyline, that was because I think it was Hasbro that nixed the original idea, which was going to be Cup who betrayed everyone. IDW nixed a bunch of ideas, like Scourge was originally going to be the big bad guy at the end. But that was IDW nixing. If you think it was Shane McCarthy was in some ways along for the ride. In a way, it sounds like the production side of it was very much like Transformers versus Visionaries, where he was given a cast and a job to do, and he did it. And fans didn't really realize that, because at the time, I think the saying that you had comic fans and you had Transformers fans was a bit more true than it is today.
Yeah, I think so. It was still more of a toy-first brand entirely. This is 2 years into IDW at that point, really. I mean, 3 almost on the calendar, but I mean, how much of 05 can you count? So, yeah.
Yeah. For myself, I have an interesting relationship with All Hail. Like I said, it's the first one I read and read live as it was coming out, so it should be kind of near and dear to my heart. I found myself by the end of it quite frustrated, and I've been the black sheep about this since I started talking to people online about it. The ending that everyone loves with Megatron and Starscream is my least favorite part of this book. We'll get into it later on, but I really liked what I thought was being set up in the first 3 to 6 issues with the Decepticons. I really liked it. I still really liked the idea. And then when it's shifted over to the Megatron Starscream relationship as it developed, I got quite frustrated. Rereading it recently for this show, I have to admit, like, Shane wrote a very good piece of dialogue. Megatron's revelation of how he saw his relationship with Starscream and the future of the Decepticons, but it just never sat well with me. As a book, I have to agree with Darryl. The first 3 issues are pretty damn intense and pretty damn strong as well, especially for what they're going, this trimmed down, lighter in story, upping the action plot. Once you bring in the Autobots, I feel the story starts undermining itself. I used to feel a lot more like this, because when this was first announced, the escalation had finished with the Autobots leaving Earth. And so I was assuming that this would be a story entirely Decepticon-focused. No Autobots, just them versus, Earth. And I was expecting big fights across the planet now. Like I said, it got trimmed down to mostly being New York, but I was still, okay, it's going to be flashes from everywhere else, Decepticons on Earth on their own. And I was very surprised when they brought in the Autobots on Cybertron, especially when basically it seemed like Simon sort of rushed the ending of Escalation to have everyone's leaving ending so that All Hail Megatron can happen on Earth, and then Shane wrote in a plot point about why all the Autobots had left Earth. And it was a different reason. Although it did lead to a really nice back and forth with Prime and Megatron at the end. Like, really like that. Especially when Prime tries to say freedom is right and Megatron tells him to shut up. Because more people need to tell him to say that when he starts saying those lines. It was a bit cooler then, but you need to stop saying the lines, Prime.
No, what was the last time he tried was Sideswipe's funeral, and he goes, I can't do this right now.
Yeah. Neither can we. I'm glad you stopped. But yeah, like, ultimately I think that I'm much kinder to the series now, looking back on it, having reread it recently. Because it was so easy to get swept up in the hype of being negative and everything else. And I think the Decepticon-focused stuff, for the most part, really strong. The Autobot stuff in itself is fairly strong. I felt like it was taking away from a more interesting story. And we'll get into my issues with the end when we get there. But so the opening for this story is, it is basically the Decepticons lay waste to a city. Mm-hmm. They show up in New York. A bunch of people seem to think the giant robots are a movie set. Okay. They murder their way across the place. Although I do remember that a lot of blood was actually edited out of the main book that was actually in the previews. Which I believe at the time was a Hasbro thing, because this was when Hasbro became more involved with IDW, because a lot of the designs in here were from the Masterpiece and Universe lines. Yep. They were switched over. Prowl and the Seekers kind of stand out for that one. So they take out most of the city. We have DJ, wonderful, wonderful DJ in his jet, who gets punched out of the sky 2 days from retirement, about to marry his gal. Everything's fine.
Isn't it always the way?
Who could have foreseen when you met DJ that was going to happen?
Yeah.
But yeah, we also get a main human character in Andy, who takes over his friend Andy Reid, and then we just continue on with this just wholesale slaughter of human beings. I especially love Frenzy's bit, which is Frenzy's power is that his scream gives everyone nightmares that cause them to lash out, including himself. The only one who's immune to it is Soundwave, and he just leaps into a pile of people with drills.
Yeah. And the visual storytelling in, you mentioned the guy that gets punched out of the air, DJ. That dogfight right before that, I struggle to think of anything before this in IDW publication order-wise that was really that intense just visually for a battle. There's, I think, 4 sentences on the page, and it's mostly like, I can't shake him, holy shit. It doesn't say holy shit, but that's what he meant to say. And, you got Laserbeak flying around. It's like, that's a bird? What the? And in the same panel, you can also see a bug flying around. And then it ends with, the transformation sequence of Skywarp, and then he's just pointing his null ray at the guy. And dude, it's really grabs you if you sit and take it in. Really.
You guys both kind of touched on it, but the art of Guido Guidi in this is something that grabbed me, and I've mentioned it on my show a bunch. I'm an art first, story second guy. So if the art is horrendous, even if the story is like beautiful and poignant and it grabs you, I cannot make it from cover to cover through a book if the art is terrible.
Yes.
So this book grabbed me with the art before I even read a single word. And Guido Guidi is to blame for all of that. He brought me into this world for that. And there was, he did stuff with scale, with Devastator in these early stuff. Devastator has never looked more menacing than he does in All Hail Megatron.
Well, I mean, in this case, just compare, because this is like the big sized up Devastator. Compare it to like how Dreamwave did it, where like the infamous dull surprise scene where he's screaming at the sky for no apparent reason, and you compare it to just the reveal shot of Devastator in this. You can't compare them. Guido, through the use of scale and just angles and just colors, especially in this as well. Josh Bertram was doing the colors, and I thought perfect choice. Yeah. Guido, like, just visual storytelling in this was something else.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of facial expressions as well. I think that is a surprisingly hard thing to nail on Transformers, at least based on seeing artists come in and out of it. And some seem to mature and be able to kind of get it after a while, and others adapt their style, and then some just never do. But I'm thinking of just Hook's initial conversation with Megatron, and it shows Hook's face a couple times, and when he's going, how vulgar, and you can kind of hear him in that cartoon voice, like, oh, how vulgar, and it's written all over his face, and it's just...
Megatron, what was it he said? Your sacrifice will be remembered or something.
Yeah, and I like that Megatron moment. It's a little one, right? But it's sort of, I mean, he just played Hook like a fiddle right there. Or they're really good buddies, and he gets it. He gets him.
Listen, you made me, I made you. We're all friends here.
He's a tyrant, and he's murdering millions of people at the time, but he's just doing his job, and he's hanging out with his buddy,
Yeah. They're going for beers later.
You're going to have a hard time convincing me Megatron has any buddies.
Yeah. I think this is the really nasty, mean Megatron.
Yeah, it phase. Is weird in a way to go back to this Megatron. Chris Ho said something once that I thought is very, very well thought out, which is IDW Megatron was schizophrenic right up until John and James got a hold of him, because there is so much contradiction, because this guy is so much more together than the guy who was in the Asian series.
Yeah.
Darryl,
I just want to mention the first 3 issues of this. I've often been asked, because people want to know. As I'm sure we all are, we're very harsh critics of the live action movies.
Occasionally.
But people will ask, if you were going to make a live action movie, what would you do? And I've given it a lot of thought, and I honestly have put forth an idea based heavily on All Hail Megatron, but as a trilogy, with essentially the first 3 issues being the first movie, where the Decepticons come in, lay waste, and at the end of the first movie, the Autobots kind of come in at the culmination and get their asses handed to them. And at the end of the first movie, the Autobots have lost, right? But it obviously continues into the second movie, which is a war where they're trying to salvage such and whatnot. And by the end of the third movie, the Autobots have won. But the first 3 issues of this are what I do base a lot of that on. Is the one panel that sticks out to me, and I believe it is in the first couple pages of issue 1. Is I think it's Starscream is shooting and trying to lay waste, and Megatron says something Megatron-y to Starscream about being a wimp, or being not able to do anything right, and he levels his fusion cannon at a building, and with one shot levels the building, and it's just awesome that the scope of this destruction that they're putting on, and at the same time throwing a sideways insult at Starscream, which is just perfect.
That is one of my favorite panels in the entire book. Just Megatron walking away from the building as it's coming. I think it's like, you talk big, but you're so small.
Yes.
Something like that, and he's just like walking away. I think I did the caption for that in TFWiki, and what was it? Urban renewal programs well underway. God, how do I remember that? That was like 10 years ago. I'm so old. But yeah, so sticking with you for a second, Darryl. This is an unforgiving 3-issue segment. There is a body count in this.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not talking about the nebulous millions have died thing. It's just like, you see if someone shows up on screen, they're going to die.
Likely, yes.
Yeah.
You mean a person, like a human.
Oh yeah. What did you think of all that? I mean, because that is like the story here is the Decepticons kill people, and Sparkplug with Wiki wants to kill a guy with a toothpick.
Yes.
Like, working in that sort of blockbuster format, do you think that was a good idea to open up with, or do you think they should have maybe gone into a bit slower, or what?
I love it. I love it because, first of all, even if the Transformers were on the planet without destroying a city, the simple act of walking around New York would kill people. They're huge. There's no way that somebody wouldn't get underfoot at some point. So yeah, I the fact that there's an insane body count, I love it. That's what they're there to do, and they did it with style.
It makes them such a threat.
Oh yes.
I think it's good, like especially in these early issues, there was at least one named character who's killed in each issue. And I thought, especially really liked the bit at the end of issue 2 after, I love Frenzy, murdering people in his own psychosis as Soundwave looks on like this disturbingly proud dad. But it's when they get Devastator to go into the water around New York, and after Thundercracker and Blitzwing have blown up the Brooklyn Bridge, he just starts punching the tunnels where people are hiding. And I just pictured at the time what that was like, and just can you imagine?
It's brilliant.
Oh
right?
Man, it's just horrific.
Yeah, and I think
to even think about that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just to say I don't know where Shane McCarthy lives, but I mean, to even think that, that would have been an option for people. He's trying to eliminate all possible exits so he can create the biggest catastrophe possible, right? So he knows he's got a bridge to get out, to eliminate, and there's a tunnel, He's done his homework, before coming here and just opening fire. It's not just some act of a lunatic. He's done some planning here. It's premeditated.
Yeah, it keeps this Megatron, because he easily could have gone into the Sunbow cartoon villain territory just full bore, but they kind of keep that just tangential on the surface with all of this. With like, Megatron has a strategy. He's thought through it. Devastator has to take out the access points to the city, and the Seekers will take the bridges out. And that's the last page of issue 2, and then into issue 3, that starts out with, and I always just adored this part. So this is kind of my favorite Decepticons wreaking havoc in the city part. Is the start of issue 3. There's people hiding out in these train tunnels, which we've just seen. They're probably not. This would be presumably maybe the ones under the city itself, and a train pulls up, and oh shit, it's Astro Train. And they don't show any of it, but presumably he transforms, and they don't show him murdering a bunch of people, but it's implied that that's exactly what happens. It's terrifying, but also just, damn, man, like, that's
just to think that that's his job. Like, Megatron said, "All right, get into the tunnels and just find everyone." That's
well, and it kind of, I wouldn't say it makes the Decepticons sociopathic, but I think what it does is it helps frame what they would think of going into an alien planet and seeing a bunch of things that they presumably just don't care about or understand. It would be like if you went under your house and there's a bunch of ants. What are you going to do? Grab some raid and kill all the ants, right? And so it kind of, that ruthlessness, I think, frames it as, they're just looking at it as these are just pests, and we're here to take this world.
Yeah, this planet is a resource. These individuals will get in the way of us making use of that resource, ergo, get rid of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
it's detached in a great way. It's just this, like, I think you're right. It's not sociopathic. It's just simply, they don't care on any level.
Yeah. And there's all this military stuff, and I want to say this was just before or right after when IDW got the G.I. Joe license. I really thought at the time of release G.I. Joe was going to show up.
Little did we know.
I know, right? Yeah, some 8 years later, it all happened, and I even think this was the crux of. I mean, there's still a lot of winking and putting your head in the sand involved, but I think one of the big pieces of making the older pre-shared universe material work is All Hail Megatron, because you have a year gap in there to throw a bunch of Joe stories in, and it is even in First Strike they flash back to in the aftermath showing Scarlet and I think Hawk, or maybe Duke or Colton. Hawk, Duke, and Colton are all like the same guy anyway. But
oh god.
Anyhow, and they're at the Statue of Liberty, kind of in the aftermath of All Hail Megatron, and it just always felt like they were going to show up, and they never did, and I was actually kind of glad at the time, because I really wouldn't have cared. It's just following the news a little bit, it felt like that was going to happen.
It would have been, looking back in it and the way it's structured, it would be very odd to have this big story, and then just sort of like, and the G.I. Joes are taking part because we're trying to promote the book that they're just getting. It just would have been very odd.
Yeah. But it would have messed it up, because, the Decepticons would have had to win. Well, like, the Avengers get killed off screen in this, so.
Yeah! Oh my, when John said that, it's just like, oh yeah, they all died. They all died, because that book needs... because he just couldn't get rid of something. All he had to do was cut one book. Actually, he could have cut 2 books, but all he had to do was cut one book from the whole continuity thing. Nope. Everything must stay. They're just all dead. We've got all this chaos, and we're also introduced to, I'd say, our major human character, which is Sparkplug Wiki. Definitely a different approach to old Sparkplug. And he's basically kind of just used to say, hey, we've got a plan. The plan failed. Fuck.
Isn't he named Daniel in this?
Yes, that's his full name, but he calls him Sparkplug. And he wants to kill a guy with a toothpick. And he is action hero, general dad.
You'd consider him more of a main character than Spike?
Honestly, yeah, because he's in more issues, and Spike becomes more important in the tail end, but everything from the human perspective at this stage is framed from Sparkplug's point of view.
In the early part,
Yeah, because he's introduced first before you realize that he's, the Spike's dad. But yeah, Spike ends up being the hero, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
They're Cup and Optimus analogs.
Yeah.
Oh my god, how did I not get that? Ah. My mind's just been blown.
Well, it's to be fair, it's really on the nose towards the end when Cup and Daniel are sitting down and he's got his Cygar and
they're just sitting on Dropshot's body.
Yeah.
Freaking nowhere.
Cybertron remold toy gave it some life. Fine by me.
Why are you in a G1 story? Because this is IDW and no fucks are given. Ah, dear. But something I really like of this early stuff is the culmination, Megatron getting everyone together for the big speech. Of just like, hey guys, we murdered everyone. And it's just framed in a very interesting way because Starscream's there and is just constantly niggling at everything. It's just like, hey, yeah, this is going well. What did he say? Victory. It's scruffy.
Yeah, and it's foreshadowing for what goes on with Starscream later, and what has happened before that hasn't been revealed.
Yeah, but as two people who are really into the direction Megatron and Starscream went in this, how did you feel about the setup of the relationship in this one, the two different perspectives on the whole thing?
I mean, it was fine. It was fine. I think it's sort of tough to take looking at it in retrospect. I think the material that came after, especially Spotlight Megatron, but also just when Megatron does come back in the Costa ongoing and how Starscream does kind of gain control, but is just really bad at it. I think that really helped. And then with what John Barber did at the start of Robots in Disguise really helped because all of that sort of plays the same beats of their relationship in this refrain through All Hail Megatron, and then the ongoing and with the Spotlight in there, and then with Robots in Disguise. And I think because of the stuff that comes after, keeping up that dynamic, it's, in hindsight, I look at it very favorably. At the time, it was just, well, of course, this is how Starscream is.
Yeah. What about you, Darryl?
I have honestly thought it was, it was fine. There was nothing wrong with the way that that was all framed. It felt a lot like G1, kind of the way that they would have Megatron would have held like a staff meeting in a cartoon. But yeah. So when I read it, I didn't see it as anything out of place. It just kind of flowed as something that fit right in with the character profile.
Staff meeting. I love that. Maybe that's where Torrin got the performance review idea.
Skywarp, you killed a lot of people, but I noticed that you didn't do it and hand in all your forms for each body, so I'm afraid you're being docked pay.
Used 2 shots when you could have used 1. Waste.
Frenzy, you killed everyone. Well done. You get a gold star. But something I really liked about this exchange, and it's all down to Guido, is Megatron cleaning his cannon as he's just chatting to him. He just takes a flag and is just wiping the cannon as he goes. It's like this. He's just so in control, or you get the impression he's in control. But at the same time, Starscream's putting this idea into your head that maybe things aren't quite what he thinks they are. And we're getting the hints of the idea that Megatron may have created a monster from the Decepticons, or at least the very early ideas of it. But so yeah, that's kind of the first 3 issues. They're very fast paced, very high octane, and very dark. And then the book largely switches focus. Because Megatron and the Decepticons are still, they still have their segments. But for the most part, from here until, let's see, I'd say issue 9, the Earth stuff is very much secondary and tertiary story. This becomes about the Autobots on Cybertron. Jazz's team basically falling apart at the seams. There's been a traitor. Ironhide thinks it's Mirage because there was that one episode of G1. Because I realized reading this, we're never actually given a reason why he picks Mirage.
No.
Well, it's because Mirage gives a report about overhearing something with Starscream. They do explain it. He has good reason. It's something about, like, I think he's the one that relays, meeting up with Starscream. And
okay, I must have missed that in the reread. But...
Yeah. And so there was also, let me make sure this actually had come out by that point. I think it had. So a few months prior to All Hail Megatron, you also had the Mirage Spotlight, which is about the closest thing to a non-canonical Spotlight that's left, right? It's basically just a dream of Mirages, but there was that one bit of foreshadowing that Mirage might be a bad guy.
Yeah, it was just like, who is the real Mirage?
Right.
And what the fuck was going on with that? Until, again, John wandered in and said, hi.
Yeah. It helps out. Combiner Wars... Combiner Wars is helped out by a lot of material that is not Combiner Wars. And this is one of the things.
But, so the Autobots are in Cybertron. So this is where we started getting a lot of people's complaints about the stuff being dropped off. I remember back in the day, because, like, Cybertron was suddenly livable. Which people weren't happy about. But I'm not going to... Like, one of the things I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out where everyone was bitching at the time, because trying to examine this wholly in context is very difficult. Yeah, just because of the amount of time that's passed and the nature of dialogue around Transformers comics. But, Bumblebee and Wheeljack are attacked by its swarm on a reconnaissance mission, or at least they think they're being attacked by the swarm. It turns out to be Hot Rod, who gets punched by Ironhide, as does everyone else. We find out that the Wreckers are now basically being run by Cup. There's a conflict between him and Jazz about control. Ironhide snaps and nearly beats Mirage to death, which is a good-looking scene, if nothing else. And then the swarm makes their move, the Insecticon swarm of hideous monstrosities, born from Megatron's efforts to make 3 guys. And we find out who betrayed the Autobots, because someone did. And it's Sunstreaker, and he literally wanted every human being alive murdered. Which I remember at the time made it very hard to sympathize with him, and is still making it hard to sympathize with him.
Hard to sympathize, but it's understandable.
Empathize, perhaps. But that still counts as a dick move.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, absolutely. At least he had motivation.
Yeah. And then it all culminates with the magical revival of Optimus Prime. After a year or so, it turned out all Ratchet needed to do was actually try to fix him.
Well, that's the weird thing is because he is in this stasis for a couple issues, right?
Yeah, well, it's implied he's been he's been like this since they've gotten on Cybertron, because he got taken out breaking the space bridge so the Decepticons couldn't follow them.
He got
and that's right, because this this series started, and because I don't remember how how I was reading it at the time, but when it starts, Optimus is on the slab, and the issues, like the books leading up to All Hail Megatron, Optimus is fine. So you're reading this and you're like, wait a minute, Optimus is almost dead. What happened here? And it is. I don't remember what issue it is, but they do explain that what happened, because it's Jazz explaining to Cup what happened to Optimus, right? And how he got his ass handed to him by Megatron, and it it's a decent story, but yeah, I was there's a lot of exposition in these issues here as to what the hell is actually happening, because they're explaining an awful lot. Like, obviously, I mean, you're probably going to touch on it. Like, Optimus doesn't have the Matrix anymore. Megatron has the Matrix. He can't use it, but he's got it. and Optimus is out. But like you said, all of a sudden at the end, he just kind of gets up and is fine.
And heroic speeching right off the bat.
Without any explanation. Which at the time of the reread, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, wait a minute, what if Optimus never got off the slab? And this entire thing has been in his head. You know?
That would be good.
If Barber comes in at the end and just Optimus at the end of Unicron just opens his eyes and they're back in All Hail Megatron.
Oh.
He just turns around, he's in the shower.
Oh, no.
I was like, oh my god, what a waste. What a waste that was this would have all been. But it kind of would be great.
I mean...
Because they could start over, right? They could essentially start over.
That's what the reboot is.
Yeah.
I'm going to be disappointed when they don't do this. If they don't do this now. You've ruined it for me,
if
Darryl.
they announce McCarthy as the writer and say nothing else, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, it would be kind of good.
Yeah. Oh, that's magical. Oh dear. But
I thought it was implied. I don't think it's stated, but isn't it implied that it's something about being able to use the scrap and the parts from the Trion is how they're able to fix Optimus? Is basically they give up on that shuttle ship that Cup and all them come in, and
it's loosely implied, but
yeah.
that section, like Ratchet spends so much time going like, listen, this is almost certainly not going to work.
I think at one point he says, I've done all I can do.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even see the surgery.
Yeah.
Optimus just wanders out, so shiny, unbelievably shiny.
I mean, he could just be being Ratchet, right? He's going, did all I could do. He's fixed. Here you go. Right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm basically working miracles here, but yeah, who's next?
Yeah.
But sort of like, Darryl, you said yourself, like, the pacing of this book, I wouldn't say slows to a crawl, but it just goes from, 10 to 2.
Yes. Yeah.
And as you said, you are a man of action.
That's what I get called every day. It's crazy. You knew that.
Yeah. Just walking down the street. It's the man of action.
I have a theme song and everything.
Yep. Do you know what? I genuinely believe you do. I don't know what it is. I think it might be something you sexy thing, but
it's a very 70s beat.
Do you have like a 70s like cop movie pimp hat?
No, I need one of those still.
You do for the live recordings.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so when it hit this like big change in pace, how was that for you? And did you like, you've said you really liked the Decepticon stuff. I mean, what the overall writing for the Autobot stuff? Did you think it worked? Did you think it didn't?
Well, I mean, as I got to issues 4 through 9 or 10, whenever it actually picked up again, I realized while reading it, I'm like, okay, they're, like I said at the start, they're cleaning up what all the Asian stuff did, and they're seeding some kind of plot as to where they are in the story and why they're not on Earth helping, right? So they're cleaning up the Sunstreaker storyline, and they need a reason why they're not on Earth, helping out. So there's the Optimus Prime, and then I'm not. When did here's where Charles would come in handy. Where's Last Stand of the Wreckers fit into this?
Wreckers comes in the ongoing, so it's
it's
Cost
after.
Era.
It's
yeah,
after.
It's got a couple of scenes set at the same time because we're told
Right.
the galaxy-wide movement as well.
Then this is
when sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, so while this is happening is when Garrus 9 would be falling.
Yeah.
okay.
During
So-
that.
So then this is the introduction of the Wreckers into IDW.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So then they had to do that knowing Last Stand is coming. So they had to get Wreckers into the mindset of people and who they were and what the team kind of loosely consisted of as far as character-wise. Because they had a book on this table that was coming out called Last Stand of the Wreckers, and the majority of their audience in North America were going to be like, who the hell are the Wreckers? And why do I care?
I have to wonder, would they have known? Because All Hail Megatron, like 4 or 5, when do they come in? Around issue 6 or 7?
They come in issue 5.
Issue 5. That's November 2008, and Wreckers started in late January of 2010.
I think they probably have at least the core elements ready to go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just for how long it takes to plot and trying to get Nick to write and draw at the same time.
The Wreckers are still, being used in those 4 Coda issues at the end too, right? So they're still using them and making use of the characters to make sure that they stay in the mindset of the reader. So they really didn't go away throughout the remainder of All Hail Megatron.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. I guess I was just more curious. I was like, I wonder. It would seem that I would guess that by the time they show up in All Hail Megatron would be around when they would be greenlighting a 5-issue miniseries.
Sure. Well, that's what I was thinking of as I got through these issues, these slower issues. I was kind of parsing out business things that they might have been discussing at the time, right? As why certain story beats are happening. Sure, everyone knows who Cup and Springer are and Roadbuster. I was happy to see Roadbuster doing some stuff because he never gets any screen time. But yeah, I was happy to see all those characters, and everyone kind of knows who they are, to an extent. But to actually see them as working as a team was fantastic. And then. Yeah, so they get kind of bunched together as a team, and then later on we see them as Last Stand of the Wreckers, which is arguably the best Transformers miniseries that there is.
The Wreckers were an interesting addition to here, especially since a lot of the Wrecker stuff was really playing up the conflict between Cup and Jazz. Especially since Jazz is portrayed in this more like a Wrecker than the Wreckers. Because the constant thing about Jazz is everyone going we know you did Black Ops. You're nice and friendly to everyone, but we know you did the Black Ops. He's like that stereotypical military character on a sci-fi who's like, oh, everyone loves you. Yep, I've done some shit. But I did like the bit where he flips Springer. Because it's just yeah. But it was just an interesting and then arguing over who gets to be in command, and Cup constantly going from, yeah, you did a good job, buddy. Oh, by the way, you fucked up. But you still did a good job, but you fucked up. But yeah, and I found the record pretty fun in this, to be honest. More so rereading it than I did initially. Which I found very surprising. I think just because that dynamic between the two groups one is together meeting the guys who are falling apart.
Yes.
And then you have Cup at the end, or Ratchet at the end, going I met, physically I can fix most people here. Mentally, we're a knife edge. No one is together. Speaking of which, we had Ironhide in this, and going back to reread this, he feels weirdly more irrational than he did at the time. Did anyone else get that, or do you still think it worked in context?
I mean, it was tough to hold any of Ironhide's things against him because they've been put into this desperate situation, and he's seen his leader and old friend go down, and they are setting up a lot for the Ironhide miniseries at that point, if that was even in mind at that point, because that was even after Last Stand of the Wreckers.
I know it wouldn't have been, because originally Costa was going to kill Bumblebee in that opening issue.
Yeah, so
the Ironhide mini would have had to come after that idea was finalized.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it felt like if you had to have a character play that role, he seems as good as any out of that Autobot cast. But it's the least under control, I feel like, we see Ironhide in most of IDW, but it's also maybe one of the more desperate and hopeless situations that he gets put in. So it's, I think kind of proportional to the context of what's going on around him.
What about you, Darryl? How did you think Ironhide was handled?
honestly, I didn't have a problem with Ironhide really. I found that he was kind of off the rails in the miniseries later on. So and I mean, he eventually may have been in the miniseries as well. I haven't read it in a while, but he goes off into the Sea of Rust or whatever and basically loses himself in there. Like he goes a little bonkers. So here he's a little stressed, but nothing that I wouldn't have expected somebody to be in the same situation. He loses his mind, legitimately later on.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like it's weird going back to this. It's like it's a combination of I feel because it's weird going back to this because my opinion of him is so colored by what he's become, who's literally a different character. But yeah, it seems really intense, and yet at the same time it does work.
It's funny you mentioned Hasbro and editorial earlier because I don't feel like we saw this Ironhide again until Transformers versus Visionaries.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, and when we did the interview at Magdalen, she did reference this series a bit. So I'm wondering if because without like trying to be negative or anything else, I don't think she went back and read a bunch of IDW stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if like in the notes she got and in All Hail Megatron he punched the shit out of literally everyone. But yeah, in a weird way defining, in a weird way not. Because it made a lot of sense at the time, because Ironhide, I may be contradicting myself as I'm going along, but Ironhide in the Asian series was a lot more in line with this character than he became. He was a lot more angry and rough around the edges, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If nothing else, like I do like looking at the panels of him punching everyone. It's a small thing, especially that one where he punches Hot Rod.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, it also ties into the best scene in the entire book, which is Bumblebee and Wheeljack. If I had all my equipment, do you have any equipment, Wheeljack? No. Do you have any equipment? You're being rude. And like, don't worry, we're going to be saved. I've got a light blinking for 1/100th of a second. No one is going to be looking at that. Cut to Cliffjumper. Just like, yeah. Been staring at this for all day, every day. Because, like, one thing, like, Shane gets crap for some of his writing, and some of it is occasionally deserved. His comedy stuff is on feckin' point. Because, like, he's really good at it, and especially working it into, like, natural dialogue like that. Would love to see him on something a bit more lighthearted, like on a larger scale.
Yeah, he works a little bit of that in Empire of Stone. Not as much, but he does work some of that in with the Ratchet and Drift interactions and things like that. One thing, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I don't know, this came up and it was bugging the crap out of me. The Last Stand of the Wreckers timeline, I recall Nick saying in interviews, that kind of came, the early ideas for it were with lunch with Denton Tipton at a BotCon. And so I looked at who attended BotCons, and that would have been BotCon 2009. So my guess is probably, this is me speculating now, the Wreckers were well received here, and then, that summer as All Hail Megatron was wrapping up was when that BotCon would have been, just before 11 came out, so the other issues would have been wrapped up. I'm guessing they said, hey, they were well received, we want to do a mini-series, and they talked about it, and that's where it came from. So, anyway.
I could buy it. Sticking with Autobot stuff, Sunstreaker, what did we think?
At the time, that's actually something I didn't like about it when it came out. Because it was just, wait, he was that was in the earlier Furman stuff in the Asians, like, that was one of the bigger stories, and then it sort of just gets dropped. And later we learn it's not dropped, and there's plenty of explaining and retconning, they do their thing. But when he first shows up and is just fine, I was like, what? That's it?
Darryl, what was your sort of take on the whole Sunstreaker part of this story?
I'm not a super big fan of it. Sunstreaker, even when it was happening in the Asian series, I was not really behind it all that much. It seemed, I don't know, the whole thing with, crap, I forgot the guy's name. Tucker?
Dante?
What was it? No,
Hunter.
Hunter.
Onions, yeah.
Onion, not onion.
I know. I still say onions. Yeah.
It's Hunter Onions.
Why was there no Titans Return toy? God, all right, sorry.
Oh, oh my God, why?
It just seemed what happened to Hunter was just it was almost gruesome what they did to that poor character. But to have Sunstreaker hold such a grudge against humans was it was a lot to kind of take in. I can understand him having some kind of PTSD over the time that was going on, but I felt like the storyline kind of took too long during the Asian series to kind of wrap up, and then to have it rear its head again here in All Hail Megatron, I thought was just too much. So I really wasn't a huge fan of it, and to see it kind of be the crux of the Autobot storyline was not my favorite thing.
For me, it was one of those things that is definitely this is an isolated event. This is if this was a movie, this would make sense. If this was a comic, like big summer event book, which it was, except spread over a year, it makes sense. As part of this broader continuity that we're seeing, it never worked for me. So this is one I really have to make myself super aware of the fact that comics work in batches. Mm-hmm. And this is the batch where Sunstreaker is a dick. Like a super dick. Mm-hmm. An understandable dick, but a dick. Same way like Megatron is this way in this book, but he's not in the previous book, and he's not in the latter book.
His dynamic with Sunstreaker, with Sideswipe, it starts to be explored here. And, after Sunstreaker, he kind of, it has the sacrificial apparent death towards the end of this series, and they always sort of touch on there was some growth, and his relationship with Sideswipe was maybe becoming more distant, but they never really go all in on that.
A bit of wasted potential, I think, because there's stuff in here that doesn't need to be here, and I would have rather have seen that dedicated to Sunstreaker and Sideswipe.
I think when I look at it, I see this, like, I think, Scotty, you mentioned it earlier, is All Hail Megatron was meant as a soft reboot, and I agree. With it having referenced the previous material, now you've got people who may want to be jumping on, and now they're stuck with a part of a storyline that they know nothing about. Especially if they're buying All Hail Megatron as the trades. I think it was divided up into 3 trades. So now they get a part of a storyline and we're like, what the hell is this? I don't understand. Why does Sunstreaker have 2 heads and one of them is a person in like armor that looks like his head? I don't understand what's going on here. So now they've got to go and find out what the hell that was about, and it was a mess for me. If I started on All Hail Megatron, I would not know what the heck is going on with Sunstreaker at all, and that's the way I kind of looked at it.
And the other fun was Maximum Dinobots coming out concurrently with this series. In fact, what did I mention earlier? Maximum Dinobots 1 came out after All Hail Megatron 5. It's in between 5 and 6. And Maximum Dinobots gives you a completely different ending for all of that. Right? To the happy ending, and they're split, and then this was not that. or at least not completely. It definitely wasn't a happy ending for Hunter. I think there was obviously some coordination, but not a whole big ton to the point where they had to do that whole Coda story to they should just called it, instead of Coda, just we're gonna fix some things. All Hail Megatron fixin'.
I like it.
Yeah.
So this all comes to a big point I have about all this Autobot stuff. Was it needed? I mean, obviously for where they took the story, it was needed. But all this stuff, even when it works, it affects the pacing of the book so much. And for me, I was so much more interested in what was going on Earth that, looking back, I kind of still really wish this was just a Decepticon series.
Yeah, I think it's just the nature of Transformers that we're going to want the Autobot stories and the Decepticon stories when it's the war story going on, and so I'm sure a lot of that was Hasbro, right? We want our heroes in these books, and the fact that there are 3 issues with basically no Autobots is that's telling. Like, that, I can't imagine that happening now, right? Or at least if it did, they'd have 3 Bumblebee covers on each of them or something like that.
Oh yeah.
So to me, it was. Just thinking of the overall structure of it, they needed to keep them in mind since they were going to have to be the cavalry that came to save the day. And I think they actually did a good job pacing those scenes interspersed with, okay, now here's the human resistance on Earth continuing to fail. But then also doing some interesting things with Bombshell along the way and Starscream and there's that other neat little scene in there. Well, with Thundercracker planting the seeds for his later actions. And then there's that one, this doesn't really have any effect on the plot, but just seems like the time to bring it out. That one little scene with the reflector bots, where 2 of them are like killing guys and the other one is just sitting around and still doing like the mimic speech, was another one of those just bone chilling, like dark.
And they say, well, we put them back together.
Yeah. And so you kind of intersperse that with, oh, well, here's what's going on Earth if you thought Cybertron was bad. And I think the pacing works out pretty well the way they jump between them.
Darryl, what do you think? I mean, did you think this Autobot stuff was important, or do you look back and kind of think, could have done without?
Well, like I said before, it's you needed to have a reason why the Autobots weren't on Earth helping, and so you put them somewhere. Cybertron, sure, why not? It's better than it's as good a place as any, and you give them a reason for being there. Prime's injured, and they're limited. They're fighting off some kind of monster, which is those swarms, which is fine. It's a good enough reason. But as far as the story, the story is 12 issues essentially. I don't think you can go 12 issues without having some kind of Autobot presence. Also, you need to have a resolution to this story at some point at the end. And the easiest way to do that is by introducing your hero character and bringing it to an end via conflict. And either that, or you have a defection within the Decepticons, which is also a very strong possibility. And again, through some kind of conflict. But that does get kind of rectified where we were talking earlier about in issue 10 or whatnot with Starscream and Megatron's little, his little motivation speech. But yeah, the Autobots, I think, definitely were needed. Their plot, their contribution to the plot could have been lessened significantly. But I still think that for 12 issues, to go 12 issues with no Autobot presence is unheard of for a Transformers book, and I don't think it would have sold very well. Whether this one did or not, I don't know.
Yeah, and story-wise, they're overbooked a little bit, but we always like seeing characters. So Trailbreaker's here, and Trailbreaker does like fuck all in this series, but I guess I should have asked if I could cuss on this show beforehand, but anyway.
There's say what you want.
All right, yeah, way too late anyway. I was like, am I giving you a bunch of beeps? But anyway, yeah, he just shows up and does nothing, but who cares? He's there, and it's fun. Like, and so Cliff Jumper has one moment, 2, and they're fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. But we've also got the Decepticon moments here, which are some of my favorite in the entire book. because this is the post-conquest Decepticons, and they are out of control. And Skywarp is wiped out Beijing, basically. But we've got him and Thundercracker coming into conflict with the Insecticons. And the Insecticons very like, oh, we are the new guys on the block and we know we're special, and these old troops, new troops. Skywarp is killing for the sake of killing. Thundercracker is losing a bit of motivation here. Megatron seems very disconnected and distant from his troops all of a sudden. And like Blitzwing's telling him to take some, giving him advice on maybe the commander shouldn't be putting himself at risk, and Megatron just like, nah, I'm gonna kill. All the while framed with Starscream and him discussing about where the Decepticons are right now, and in what ways this is a victory and what ways it isn't. And then Starscream, of course, beginning to make his move, meeting up with the Insecticons, so discussing maybe we can turn things around. So I really like Starscream in these issues. Like, I really, really like him. This very controlled. The niggling's not there. Like, it feels to me like when he's talking to Megatron, this is some quite genuine concerns being voiced. So I love Decepticons in these pages. So what do you guys think?
I would say the Decepticons are written very well. I did like, and I don't know whether we've gotten quite into the last few issues here, but we definitely, one of the best lines I think were when the Autobots and the Decepticons are fighting at the end, and I think it's Sunstreaker. It must be Sunstreaker. He's trying to find the bot who did this to him, and he's fighting Bombshell, and Bombshell's like, look no further. You're looking at him, kind of thing, and it drives him into a bit of a rage.
Oh yeah, that was Sideswipe.
Oh, Sideswipe, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and so it's the Decepticons are very calculating. Again, like you mentioned, Scotty, the Thundercracker bit is fantastic right at the end, as everything's kind of cleaning up. Thundercracker is just kind of sitting there, and they're offering him a hand, like, "Hey, you know what? You're coming. We'll welcome you over to the other side." And he's like, "Shut up! I'm not defecting. This isn't what I signed up for. So I'm going to help you. And this is going to be the end of it." And it was great. I really liked the way the Decepticons were written in this.
Darryl, Scotty, what's your opinion on?
Yeah, well, he said Darryl. I think he covered really a lot of it, and it just to expand on Thundercracker a bit. We don't see much of him in the Costa run for obvious reasons, right? He gets blasted by Skywarp, but it set the stage for this is the first time Thundercracker was interesting to me, and was his own. I think that's one of the best things that McCarthy does with the Decepticons here is makes the Seekers different characters, and they're not just Starscream 2 and Starscream 3 that follow Starscream. As far as Thundercracker and Skywarp go, if you go back to the G1 cartoon, there's a little bit of distinction with them, and Skywarp has his powers and whatnot, but really after season 1, they're just background guys again. So I think this kind of planted those seeds for who they are, and Skywarp is still that guy. All through to the end, and I know the Joe series didn't get taken to completion, but I think he was going to just turn full dick heel on them again by the end of that.
Yeah.
So that I think was probably the bigger contribution. But that Megatron, I'm sure it was unintentional, but I think there are some seeds there of, and it plays a little bit with when we first see him in Infiltration or early in Escalation, I forget which one, where he is kind of more calculating. And we do see like the fearsome, badass, war ruler, conqueror Megatron, but I also always felt like the reason he starts to lose control in New York, and we sort of see this later, is because there's all this stuff going on that he's trying to coordinate. And maybe he's got himself stretched too thin in this by, trying to kind of stage this big surge of Decepticon takeovers while simultaneously trying to build some base out of New York because of, it's implied but never said, it's because the Ultra Energon is on Earth. In fact, never even implied, maybe I made that up in my head as a, this must be why they're doing it, you know? And I think it just gives some seeds of things that are explored later, and whether they were intentional or not at the time, I think, you know, it kind of really establishes him as who he is as a leader, just in time for him to go down again for a while.
Yeah. And in that case, let's get to the end of the book, which is, you know, it's chaotic. Starscream makes his move. Devastator fights Megatron, which I looking back from like now we've got the whole 0.1% thing, makes more sense. At the time, I was just like, okay, that's a really cool shot of Megatron grabbing his fist, but what? You know, Spikewood, he finds a magic Skywatch gun to shoot Megatron. The Autobots show up, they have their big fight, and at the end, Starscream sides with Megatron, and the Autobots are told, thanks for the help, now get off our planet. But like I said, for me, I am the black sheep in that this culmination, and like there's lots of stuff in here I actually like. The Omega Supreme fight was cool. I love the Megatron Optimus dialogue. But the Starscream Megatron relationship here falls apart for me. And I am literally the only person on the planet. So I want to hear your guys' opinion on that before I be the odd man out. So, you know, the way it played out for Megatron and Starscream, the revelation of Megatron's grand plan for the Decepticons and Starscream himself. What's your thoughts?
I kind of just want to hear you shit on it, actually. I mean, I feel like I gave my 2 cents on it, but I don't know, Darryl, if you want to jump in on any of it.
Well, before I kind of back it up one more time, this issue 11 contains my absolute favorite piece of Transformers art. And it is, I think it's page 3 or something like that. And it's with, after Spike gathers up that rebel squad and runs out of the building, to Devastator just towering over the city. And that shot of Devastator is just incredible. It really is. It's by far the coolest thing, and I'm just in awe every time I kind of look at it, because it's just amazing. So as far as the speech from Megatron, it's Megatron just kind of telling Starscream that that he is aware of all the backstabbing and all the plans that Starscream's been making up until this point, and that if he wants to rule the Decepticons, he's going to have to eliminate Megatron. Megatron won't step down. He won't hand it over. It's going to have to be taken. But he also lets him know that he knows it will happen, that the Decepticons will be his. And that's something that he's come to terms with. He, at the time, like I said at the start, he needs to get Starscream on his side because he needs him to accomplish something to kind of hold the Autobots back. And this is a motivational speech from Megatron to say, look, check your ego right now because I need you. This Decepticon squad will be yours to rule one day, but not today. Today is now, and today they're mine. But you will be the leader someday. And it works. It works for, Starscream, and it gets everything going. But it does show you that Megatron has thought well into the future, to a point where he will not be able to hold Starscream's, his ambition back anymore, and that Starscream will at some point do something to eliminate Megatron, and he's fully aware of it, and Starscream is now aware that he knows. So yeah, So basically, I thought it was a great piece of writing. But go ahead and shit all over it. It's fine.
Well, I'll start off. The writing itself is good. What they're saying, it's interesting. The idea that Megatron's like, oh, you'll kill me one day. Like, that's an interesting idea. Everything else. The problem for me is that I thought they were building up to something that, to me, was way more interesting. Which was Megatron hadn't thought this far ahead. That he, like, when the Decepticons started falling apart and Megatron seemed to be losing his grip on things, I was so into it. It was just like, wow. Starscream's going to try and turn on Megatron, not because he's Starscream, but because he sees that Megatron has created a bunch of monsters and he doesn't, he has no real control of them, and he doesn't really want control of them. He's just going to let them run loose. They're going to murder away for no reason, and the Decepticons will be nothing more than these broken shells of people. And Starscream, in the right, makes his move on Megatron. And I thought that was where the story was heading. It was going to be, oh, wow, what an interesting point of view. Like, you're doing the Starscream betrayal, but you're turning it on its head. Like, why is he betraying him? Because it's literally for the best of everyone, because Megatron cannot be in charge anymore. Like, he has made a bunch of murderers, and he has no control of them. And even the guys he just literally created are out of control. And you I thought it was great. That worked for me, because it also, like, Skywarp's highlighted as he's gotten to a stage where literally he thinks that the entire point of what he's doing nowadays is just killing. And I loved it. And then we hit this. And the problem for me with this is that for all the veneer, for all the flash, for everything else, it is literally the traditional Megatron-Starscream relationship play-by-play. Which is, Starscream betrays him, Megatron shows up and says, you're wrong for betraying me, the Autobots arrive, and they put their differences aside and work together. The end. Now, it ends at an interesting point, which is Starscream saving Megatron, saying, like, no, I am part of the system now. And the system will one day play in my favor. But for me, it went from something that, for me, was super creative and interesting to something that had a lot of creative veneer that was basically just a G1 cartoon again. And I was so excited for this idea of Megatron, the guy we've seen as this in-control, powerful leader figure, having basically just gotten the thousands of monsters together and made them worse. And having Starscream as the one guy there who was together enough to see it all for what it was. And then we get this tradition, what for me is a weirdly traditional ending to a Megatron Starscream story. And it just swept the rug out from under me. And I've never gotten past it. And I've read this story 10 or 12 times trying to get past it over the years. And every time I get to that bit, I'm just like, well, it's well written, but it's pissing me off.
So you don't like it because the story you came up with in your head was better.
Kind of, yeah. Which is, it's a fan thing to do. And it like I said, I very much realized that this is me being a broken shell of a human being. But it's one of those times when I had a narrative, was so sure of where the narrative was going. And I thought it was so inventive. And then it didn't go that way. And I just felt that where it did go was just too safe. Especially after I felt like so much momentum was lost overall in the Autobot section. Because I would have loved, I would have loved this book at the time was just a Decepticon. So yeah, the fan fiction I was writing in my head, got written out, and I've never really gotten past that. I am that guy.
All right. Well, I mean, that's good for you.
Yeah, it's. I can't say it's unreasonable, but it's one of those that I think if what the story actually had was bad, it would be, I could see going in plenty of other directions that we'd want to have our take and where we thought, we wanted it to go. But I think that much of this had to just be set up, because I'm just thinking about where the story goes with the Decepticons from here. And I want to believe there was some long-term plotting to know that, he was going to come back, and at least the high level of wanting to use that dynamic. And I don't know. I guess I have a hard time disliking it, knowing where it goes. So it's hard to say, go back in time. And I didn't get to read the ending at the time when it came out because my shop had closed up. So, it's kind of hard to take that out of the picture. But I think in a vacuum, it makes sense.
And I don't remember any G1, ending where Megatron admits that Starscream will be the successor to him, and that to do so he will have to eliminate him. I thought it took a significant turn. It wasn't. I don't think it was as safe as you say it is. I mean, Starscream will have to kill Megatron to become the leader of the Decepticons, is what Megatron is saying. It's not saying that, I'll just die of old age and they'll be yours, right? You will have to eliminate me, right? That's what Megatron is saying here. And that to do that, then they'll be yours. And that Starscream understands that enough at the end of the fight to not take over the Decepticons when Megatron is beaten, but to in fact save his life because it's too easy here. To lead the Decepticons requires a test, and it needs to be earned, and this is not earned. This is given. And he knows that. He understands that now. And that's where that speech came in. And that's another reason why I liked it so much.
Huh. Like I said, I realize I am the problem here.
I mean, it's all good.
This is my fandom moment. I have a few over the years.
The differences of opinion make it interesting. If we were all agreed, this wouldn't be very fun for anybody to listen to.
True. Well, in that case, let's wrap up on the main series. Overall thoughts. I'll lead this time. I think it has. At the time, I think I was too into fandom. I think it has actually benefited from the way the books have gone, and this was a much more enjoyable reread for me than it has been in the past, because it's been 6 years since I really sat down to it. But I think the Autobot thing, still the pacing just shifts way too much, and for all the fact there's good stuff in there, I'm still going I want to get back to hear what the Decepticons are doing. But I think this is a book that was treated overly harsh in its time. But I think, this is not a bad era all in all. And spoilers for the next retrospective, it kicks the shite out of the Mike Costa era. Yeah. Which, we'll be talking about some Costa stuff in a moment that kind of should have really given us some alarm bells when I think back on it. But Darryl, sort of summary of your whole All Hail Megatron maxi series opinion.
It's still one of my favorites. If people outside, I read it and I was not part of the fandom at the time. I was just a comics reader. If people ask me outside of the fandom, if there's a really cool Transformers story to read, I'll push them to All Hail Megatron, or I'll push them to Last Stand of the Wreckers. I think Last Stand probably tops it now, but All Hail Megatron was my go-to for a long time. 12 issues, right in there. It ends really well, and starts really well, like you said, and we all kind of agree. It kind of dies in the middle, but it's a good series. I still will defend it.
What about you, Scotty?
Yeah, so I think this is one that, as a more casual Transformers comics reader at the time, I really welcomed it and enjoyed it and appreciated the change of pace. And I think it's aged really well and was probably panned more by fans than deserved. I agree with that. And, I think you mentioned Andy Schmidt's comments about, how well it did and all that. And that's always going to be a little bit overblown. But I think it was a shot in the arm that the series needed to, just drum up interest. I mean, the controversy alone kind of drummed up interest in a way.
Mm.
And yeah, I just think it's something that was, panned maybe a little bit much at the time, but also understandably so, because again, if you go back and I don't know if there's a good list anywhere. Maybe I should just put it up somewhere on our forums or something, but if you look at the publication order, it's chaos. And I don't mean the miniseries. It was a wreck, and then those first few issues kind of come in and they hook you, and they're grounded in their own, their own reality, which maybe wasn't as consistent with the one that had been established, but I think it was welcome. And the other thing that I think about it is when I see some of the complaints about where the IDW Transformers story has gone, which I'm a huge fan of 2012 on. I think you can't get better, but there are people that disagree with that, and they have very good reasons. And I think this is a book that if you don't like the direction it's gone, that is very, plot driven in RID and Optimus Prime, or character driven with More Than Meets the Eye and Lost Light, and you want more of the, Darryl, you talked about the big action scenes and Transformers actually transforming and fights and things like that. When people kind of opine sometimes about what they want to see or what they want to see in the reboot, I almost feel like sometimes it's All Hail Megatron. Maybe not exactly this, and maybe with some refinement and things like that. But I think if they were to, as they approach doing a reboot next year, if they look at this style, like if you do something kind of like this, but without, some of the slower parts with the abandoned Cybertron and all that, it might go over pretty well as its own new thing.
No, I think that's a pretty good opinion, actually. I didn't really put that together, but yeah, I'd say a lot of people, this is kind of the story that would be a good opening volley for a reboot. But yeah, so that is the main series, guys. But it was followed by 4 issues, originally called Coda. Since just been, I think it's just the last volume of All Hail Megatron now. And they were basically 2 stories, each issue by different writers and different artists, giving little character vignettes. There was one on Prime and Ironhide, Starscream, Bumblebee, Spike, Sunstreaker, Perceptor, and of course Cup and Prowl. And these were basically, half of them were kind of like covering bits and pieces that people were complaining about in the main book at the time. And I think Andy Schmidt said that some of these stories were written with the idea of explaining things so people would stop complaining. And some of these were setting up stuff for the future. Art was covered by lots of different people. We got to see Don's new style for what would be in his work in the ongoing. We got to see Chi's stuff, which was, I believe, the first time he'd ever worked on Transformers, and he'd go on to the Bumblebee miniseries. Andrew Griffith's in here, for which one? Andrew did the Galvatron story, which surprised me, because I always thought that was like EJ or something, but no, it was Andrew. Casey's in there, Nick's in there, who else? Guido did one story in there, which was the Spikewood Wiki one. So I'm not going to go into each individual story in detail, but it was an interesting collection of what I'd call ups and downs. The Ironhide Optimus story, not pretty, but I like the ideas behind it, and it's the last bit of the main IDW universe written by Simon, which only hit me a little while ago. On the other hand, you have the Starscream story in the same book, which is, hey, remember how that book ended with Starscream going, I can't just sneak my way into Decepticon leadership and take over Megatron without facing him head on. It's a story about Starscream trying to sneak his way into Decepticon leadership without taking on Megatron head on. Which again, really should have given us some warning bells. So there's quite a jump in quality in stories here. Probably, there is kind of the big takeaway story here was Everything in the Right Place by Nick, with some help from James, which was basically defining Prowl. And rereading it, wow, that does actually hold up really damn well. But God, I mean, what was your... This is like pretty much a summation kind of thing. did you think Coda worked, and was there any stories that particularly stood out to you, good or bad? Darryl.
Well, I'm going to agree with you on the Cup story by Nick. Recently on Transmissions, we reviewed the Spotlight Cup, and I remember at the end, Yoshi was asking about future, follow-ups to the story and where did the story go, and here's basically where the story ended up going immediately after that, and you get a lot of exposition as to why, where the Saigar comes from. He's got his new body, that kind of thing. It's a good story, and yeah, you get some new stuff from Prowl, and the revelation that Prowl has got some motives with Cup. It's not exactly all good times ahead. He's going to use Cup because he's a recognizable face, and he's going to further his agenda. It's an interesting story for sure, especially that packed into half a comic, which is really good. The other one that I kind of liked was the story in 16, which was Bumblebee's one. He's asked about basically about he's by himself at the start and trying to avoid detection because he's come across a part of a bot that's just an arm, and it's kind of freaking him out, and there's a human military squad after him. They know they can follow him. He can't transform to get away because he's got damage. He's radioed for help, and there's basically he's still hidden, but the military crew fires a rocket and blows up a car that's just a regular car, but it damages a building that has a family in it, and he can tell by looking at it, the specs, that it's going to fall down, and these people just keep arguing about it outside, and he ends up having to reveal his position to save the family, and it's at that point that the radios kind of go all crazy, and they warn. They call for backup and stuff like that, and that's what brings the rest of the Autobots to help Bumblebee, because his radio was dead and he never knew. So it was a good, cute story, even though he takes a lot of damage, but he sacrificed himself to save this family, and that was the whole point, is that Bumblebee wouldn't be able to stay safe because he would have to save somebody, and that was a nice little touch at the end. I liked that. So that was a cute one.
Yeah. Any ones that sort of stood out to you for being bad or not as great?
Oh, I mean, some of them were the art in them was good. The second story in 16, I'm just kind of hitting it now because it's also good. It followed up. It's what happens to Spike at the end, because they want to know what happened to him. The art in it, I believe, is Casey Collar, and it's fantastic.
The Spike one is Guido.
Is it Guido? All right. Well, it's great. It's great anyway. But I'm just kind of flipping through them right now just to see. And off the top of my head, I can't think of any that were terrible. But I'm trying to flip through them real quick here just to see and remind myself of which ones were which. Come back to me.
Scotty, what about you?
Yeah.
What's
so
your
I haven't
this one?
crapped on a lot in this episode. So the one with Optimus and Ironhide, I think, is bad. It's kind of vapid. The art's bad. It's just not good. It's just not. I mean, I guess I can't sit and crap on it too much. There's just not enough. There's just nothing there. It just exists. And then the stuff with Galvatron and Cyclonus and Scourge in a vacuum is cool. It was neat to see them come back, and I think what they eventually did with the Heart of Darkness and what Galvatron... Speak not the name. Well, story-wise, I think that and going into Chaos and the seeds of it being here, and in... I want to say it was Revelation, maybe. I could be getting it wrong. It's getting late. But, I think they were kind of maybe doing some neat things, and it was seeing Galvatron kind of being manipulated and then given his later history as well, it's just sort of part of this larger tapestry of Galvatron and Cyclonus being kind of interesting. But it is a disjointed story. It doesn't fit with the rest of this stuff. It's with a lot of those you can kind of see, there's the setup for the Ironhide mini, the setup for the Bumblebee mini, the setup for Wreckers, or the retcons for Sunstreaker, the retcons for Cup, follow up with Spike and set up for the ongoing, and then why is that here? And it's it's set up for really stuff that didn't come till a year later, more.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. It was like Heart of Darkness was mid-year 2.
Yeah. So it's just kind of a weird one in itself, but I don't think bad overall. The other thing that I like, and I kind of just wanted to point this out for anyone that listens to the Twincast, is some consistency here. Because I mentioned when we were talking about the last issue of Unicron, how I was like, oh yeah, there's a Monstructor showing up, yippee, and how I was just not blown away by that. And then we see it in one of these Coda stories. I'm gonna get it wrong which one that it is, but let me flip to the name of it. The one with Perceptor fixing himself.
Yeah.
Is it Lost and Found?
Yeah, that's one.
Yeah. And there at the end, there's Monstructor showing up again. What I need to do is count how many times it happens, because I actually I went through and I counted how many times Ravage looks like he dies before he actually dies, and if you add it all up, he actually dies on number 9.
Oh my God.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And the amount of times John Barber gives him apparent deaths, I think they did that on purpose, because they cram a few in. But I should go back and count how many times Monstructor shows up, and that combined with the weird, pointless Maximal redesigns that look like spooky movie aliens. I just wasn't impressed in that Unicron book. I'm going way off topic now.
Feel free.
So anyway, that one jumps out. The other thing that jumps out at me with these Codas is I had not looked at all this. So I did a reread of Phase 1 2 years ago, and it was all with floppies. So I did the strict chronological ordering, which was like you grab this one, you read 3-4 pages, then you grab some other book, and it works really, really well when you do okay, here's the Wreckers coming back and some of the All Hail Megatron ones, then you jump to everything in its right place, then you go to Spotlight Drift, then you go to Lost and Found, then you go into All Hail Megatron and Ernest, and then you go into Spotlight Prowl, and then you go into Wreckers. It works really well, and I was shocked that this Phase 1 Volume 5 hardcover doesn't reorder anything. It is All Hail Megatron 1 through 12, and then all the Coda stories as published. When the volume right before it, Volume 4, it has, that's the one that has Maximum Dinobots in it, because it's when that happens, even though they were published concurrently. So I just want a volume that puts all of it in order. Because it reads really, really well, but it's such a pain to do that I don't bother to do it.
The Nick Roach Special Edition is what you want.
That doesn't have it either.
No, it doesn't. Oh God, why doesn't that have Cup in this? Why doesn't Spotlight Cup and this story? That would. Oh, now I'm angry.
Well, didn't mean to do that, but yeah. So that's the big takeaway from the Codas for me. Is I kind of understand why they are, but I'm disappointed that the hardcovers, the IDW collection hardcovers, don't put them. There's a story called Everything in Its Right Place, and it's in the wrong place. So, God.
So that's the Codas, and that sort of winds us up to the last bit of this, which is actually it's sort of a twofer. We've got Maximum Dinobots, which Scotty reminded me happened at the same time as this, so we might as well throw it in here. And we've got the Spotlights, which are 5 issues. They made up All Hail Megatron Volume 4. It is Blur, Jazz, Metroplex, Drift, and I'm missing one. Cliffjumper.
Sorry to correct you. It's Volume 3, and I only know that because I have it right in front of me.
Okay.
Would not have known off the top of my head. The Codas were Volume 4.
Okay. Was there a Volume 5? Am I making it up?
No.
Okay. So we'll do Spotlight first since they're the most connected. They are standalone stories, some of which ran alongside All Hail Megatron, or the All Hail Megatron era, several of which were set in the past, and one was Drift, which is set in sort of a nebulous near-ish time. Very interesting approach to things. They're mostly written by Shane, but not entirely. The Jazz one is written by two long-term fans whose name escapes me at the moment. Let me see. Load you bloody thing.
I'm on a credits page. Josh Van Rake and Sean Noller did the Jazz one.
Yeah, I remember reading at the time they were like long-term fans who were like, this was their big breaking moment. And considering I actually think this is a pretty fun read, I'm surprised we never saw them again.
Yeah. And Andy Schmidt did Metroplex, and all the others were Shane McCarthy.
Yeah. The art was done by various people, like EJ did Jazz, Casey did, he did Blur and Drift, Robbie Musso, who we have not seen nearly enough of, did Cliffjumper, and Marcelo Martier did Metroplex. Mm-hmm. And Metroplex does a really interesting thing where it's all double page spreads. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was very interesting and fun and worked. I mean, it ultimately led to having less story, but I thought it worked. And also Gullbug is his own guy. So, did you like these spotlights? Did you have some fun with them? Is there anything particularly noteworthy about them? I do want to touch on the Drift one and a little bit, but sort of, were there highs and lows for you guys? So, Scotty, what did you think of them?
Well, I really like the Drift one. Again, when it's kind of taken in place, in order, in a vacuum, it's a weird story. I should have gotten this out for this podcast because there's kind of some fun little nuggets in there of information. They did, when Empire Stone 1 came out, they did a director's cut version of Spotlight Drift, which was really just Spotlight Drift with some extra pages and artwork, but there was some commentary from McCarthy in there, which I thought was really cool. Like, he's explaining why there's a giant Transformer-scaled alien woman, on this planet that he's in, and I think McCarthy's commentary on the first 4 or 5 pages is probably more interesting than the 4 or 5 pages, because they're there, they exist. Look at Drift, he's cute, which he actually is pretty cool. I thought, I never had a problem with him, so. It just kind of stands out for, being Spotlight Drift, I suppose. But, you mentioned Cliffjumper, and, Robbie's a friend of mine, and, he did this issue, and, I didn't know him at the time. This was, years before that, but, it's got a style that I don't think, even looking at the other things he did, like Spotlight Ultra Magnus, this is almost, anime style.
Very
anime in specific, not manga.
No, very 70s, 80s anime stuff like Space Battleship Yamato or Gundam or something like that. I'm
thinking more like Gunbuster and things like that, but I think I say that because I know that he's a fan of that stuff.
Oh yeah, but I think it's just the human, the exact shape of the human heads makes me think really retro.
Right, yeah, that's yeah. So. And I think it's good characterization for Cliffjumper. I just kind of wish the story mattered more in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, it plays into something Shane does, which is the war is pretty pointless and fucks people up. That is like the overarching thing. If Shane writes a story that's in the main IDW universe, it's about how the war is fairly fucking pointless. And I like that. I like a lot of that issue. Like, I love the Decepticons going like, wait, what? Small red guy? Oh, right. Who?
Yeah.
Oh, no. We're gonna die. But yeah, it is completely self-contained.
Yeah, it's one of those issues that I feel like if John Barber had to write another year, because I think he wants to be done, but I think if he had to, stuff like this in Blaster, he would go and pluck stuff and make them matter. Like, there'd be an ore on that planet Cliffjumper was on or something, and but I think it's a fun story and worth reading for the art, and a lot of these stories in these spotlights they're really super optional. I think in the grand scheme of things, Drift I think is good to read, and Metroplex only recently became relevant at all. as far as what happens in the spotlight. I mean, he's a relevant character, but yeah, they're fun. So,
Darryl, what about you?
I've always been a real big fan of the spotlights, and for the longest time was campaigning to bring them back in any shape or form, because they can really fill a lot of holes when you're trying to, do 6-issue arcs in a story where you might fill the pages with dialogue and go back and forth through time periods. I'm referring to Optimus Prime 1 through 6, which was a mess. But I want to say, Drift was good. I enjoyed Blur immensely. It was a really fun book. The art, like I said, I'm art first. The art in Blur was fantastic. Casey did a great job. The Metroplex one, amazing art in that one. The scale in which Marcelo was able to draw was fantastic. I really enjoyed a lot of these. Cliff Jumper, the story, I did not like the story. So, but the art was fine. I didn't mind the art, but the story really didn't hook me. But and I found it kind of funny. I was looking at the Jazz one again, and the Jazz one is really a story about tracks. So, which I found kind of funny. So it almost could have been like Spotlight Jazz and Tracks, or almost a Spotlight Tracks, really. But it's funny to think about it like that. But they're good. I like them a lot, like they are. But I gotta say, if I were to pick a favorite out of these 5, it'd probably be Blur, just because of the ego that he portrays in the issue is just so great, and it can't work in a world torn apart by civil war. He has to check that ego, and it's and pick a side, really, because it's if not, he's nobody's going to be around to remember him, and because he'll be just pushed aside. It's more important things. So yeah, but these were fun. There's a lot of fun spotlights out there.
Yeah, these are actually some of my favorite ones. Because these are properly standalone. These are properly spotlights. They're not, for the most part, encumbered by having to fill in gaps from another story. I think it's a good point that artistically they're pretty much an all-out success. Casey does fantastic work throughout. Robbie Musso, please do all more Transformers is all I'm going to say to him. He did Spotlight Ramjet, the best spotlight ever. Fight Me in the Street.
That one.
That is the best spotlight. I will take people out. It's just visually just really well done. Writing wise, I like Cliff Jumper. I like it for what it wanted to be more than what it occasionally was. If that makes sense. Blur, I think, is really fun, and I really like how well this Blur leads into the modern Blur. There's a very easy transition in those characters. Jazz, now you've said it, I do really like the idea that for Tracks, the spotlight about him is him, well, I'm telling someone else's story, but really it's my story. Because I'm that guy. So it works actually within the characters. I really like that now you said it. Metroplex, the story doesn't do a huge amount for me, but I think the visual tricks it pulled were pretty clever.
Yeah.
And yeah, Drift.
That six shot stuff in Metroplex was great.
I love the just the hand moving. There should have been dun, dun, dun.
We tend to forget now that it's been, brought back up in the pages of Optimus Prime. I guess it was probably 6 months ago now, but that was a mystery. That was one of those Phase 1 unsolved mysteries for years, right? Yep. What happened to Six Shot? Now we learn that the Throttlebots eventually just shot and killed him in space or something off page.
Maybe.
I think so. I think they're out of space to do anything else with that.
Yeah, basically just we need to remove Six Shot. We don't have time.
At the time, I said, "Oh well, maybe a bit of something else." But now then learning the continuity was ending, I think that's all. Is it the Throttlebots just killed him later? the surviving ones. So, but that was, I think it was notable for a while, and I especially noticed that a couple years ago doing that reread. I was like, whoa, what about this? What about this? 6-shot, big deal.
I just like the idea that 6 bots killed 6 shot.
Oh, I see what he did. There. Yeah.
I like it.
But Drift, I wanted to touch on because obviously at the time Drift was a wee bit controversial. He was being pushed by IDW and Hasbro a lot. And this brought up the idea. This was when people were like, oh, should you have new characters when there's so many G1 characters you're not using? And that was the dialogue. And like, his role in All Hail Megatron was to be cool and murder stuff. Which wasn't the deepest thing. And this is like looking into him, and we get like, he's a former Decepticon, he's very spiritual, blah, blah, blah. And I remember at the time going, oh, I see so many things in here that make me think that Shane watches too much anime. And I say this as someone who, if you've listened to the show, I may watch too much anime. Just a wee bit. But for me, this was very, very, like, there was a lot of these kind of books in the early 2000s of people who were into anime who were going like, okay, I get a chance to write my own story. And what they did was write a short 40-minute episode of an anime that hitting literally every trope you can hit. Like, right down to what is it? Deadlock is dead. My name is Drift, with giant sword scene. I have seen so many shows that has happened in, like, I can't even begin to count them. And also, like, for some reason, Turmoil went through, like, a 2-year period of, like, people telling me he was amazing after this. And I think it's literally just because he was black and had a giant gun for an arm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But, like, people were super insistent that Turmoil was the best character in this. I'm just like, was he a character? But, I really felt Drift is very tropey, but I think it's actually fun in that tropiness. Like, it's self-aware.
He's reveling in it, really. And
yeah.
I think some of those things coming up, like, Deadlock is dead, or whatever he says, I think that's a very much, like, breaking the fourth wall. Like, I just think that's part of his humor coming out.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite Drift standing in a shower of cherry blossoms, but it's pretty close. I love that he worked that in the Drift mini.
Yeah.
But no, it's an easy, fun read. And I think that's a very good way of putting these spotlights. They're not necessarily challenging you, but they are an enjoyable read for the most part. So moving on from there, we've got Maximum Dinobots, which I don't want to spend a lot of time on, just because I'm very aware of both the time for ye and the time for me. But it's one of those books that I adored at the time. Odd that. Me, of all people, adoring a Dinobot story. But reread it 6-7 months ago. Was surprised by how badly it aged. Mm-hmm. The dialogue style, especially. I remember I remember genuinely, it's the first time I ever read a comic and had to look a word up. Grimlock's giving a speech to Slag, and there's something in there just like, what? I've never seen that before in my life. The very action heavy, and I think the action part is really solid. Like, the visual part, Nick, I think, did a great job. These are my favorite Dinobot designs, full stop, and I'm part of the reason I'm still annoyed about the Power of the Primes designs, because they look bizarre, especially because across the way is Jurassic Park toys in my Smiths and my toy shop, and I'm just like, this is weird. Why are these things here in the 2018?
Those toys aren't very good. The Power of the Primes Dinobots aren't very good. So
you buy them because they're the Dinobots.
Mm-hmm.
Let's call it spade a spade. They're fun in that aspect, but and I just really want cool updated Dinobot designs, and I really like these. And for some reason, I'm always bumping into people who think I'm completely nuts for liking these Dinobot designs. But the actual story is a bit up and down. It really does feel like, and now I've got to wrap a bunch of stuff up. I love Scorponok in it. He is such a James Bond villain, and I really, really had fun with that. But Hot Rod doesn't actually do much. The Sunstreaker resolution is a little weak, especially at the end where it's just kind of rushed. And then obviously, hey, Hunter didn't go on to have a good life. Our life. No, it's weird to me how much I loved this book at the time, and how excited I was to buy it. And then I've got, like, every copy I've got is signed by both Nick and Simon. It's one of the few books I have all the physical copies of, because I went digital just because it was cheaper. And yet I came back to it, and I'm just, like, really surprised by how the nostalgia goggles were on for this one. So I'm very curious to see your guys' thoughts. So, Darryl, what did you think of it all?
Well, I didn't like the look of the Dinobots, so I'm going to disagree with your feelings on that. And the look of the Dinobots, weirdly had a lot to do with my take on the book itself. A series called Maximum Dinobots seemed to have Dinobots in it. So I really didn't seem to like the 5-issue mini that much. It's fine. I mean, on the reread, it ended up being fine. It wasn't anything that nothing really stood out to me all that much. But it was the art that. And again, nothing about the art. It's just the design elements of the characters, the main characters, that really just, like, Swoop. I'm looking here on issue 5. Swoop looks emaciated. Like, I couldn't get past the designs of the characters, the 5 main characters, and that just, it bothered me every single page. It's just, and that goes back to just my reading style, right? It's art. I gotta go back to art, and if the art just doesn't fit, I'm not gonna enjoy the book.
Well, I disagree on the actual designs of the characters, but on the art itself, what I don't think worked for me, despite I can look at the lines and I can look at the colors and I can see that, the creative team that did it, Nick, James Reyes, Josh Burcham, Jonah LaFuente, objectively, a lot of the action scenes are very good, but from a reading perspective, and a lot of this just has to do with what color the Dinobots are. It's a lot of mashed together gray and black, and it's a little hard to tell what's going on. If you really sit and look at it and try to isolate that panel into your view, you can, without a lot of effort. But sometimes if you just glance at it, it's just a big mash of gray stuff.
Yeah, it's like, this is where I really realize that my own sort of, like, experiences and everything else makes this way easier to read. It's like, actually, I had the same thing with Age of Extinction. A lot of people I know were just like, I have no idea which one is that? Is that the T-Rex? Is that I have no idea. It's all just grey monsters flopping around. It's like, it's obviously Grimlock. That's obviously this guy. It's like, no, of all people, I'm going to be able to follow those particular designs as they move. And it's sometimes hard for me to put myself in other people's shoes and go, like, other people don't see the same lines you do sometimes, because it is a sea of grey, red, and yellow. But no, yeah, it's a weird book to go back on and realize that I think I was just so excited to have a Dinobot book. And I think what I've come to expect from writing in Transformers books has changed so much. And it's really weird, especially at how I felt at the time, to go back and feel like All Hail Megatron was so much stronger than it. When at the time I was just complete, All Hail Megatron, very flawed read. Maximum Dinobots, best book out of IDW. And just like, it's a bit of a flip around for me. It's so weird. But yeah, like, I think that's enough on Maximum Dinobots. So we're going to wrap up, and how we're going to wrap up is how I'm going to be wrapping up the rest of these retrospectives. And I'm going to be asking you, gentlemen, we're moving into a brand new era. In 2019, the entire franchise in IDW is being rebooted. We have no idea how they're going to approach it. What would you like to see? So, Scotty, I mean, your ideal reboot, what would it be?
They don't, but
I have some bad news.
So, yeah, I know. I'm in the acceptance phase, or I don't know, whatever it is, all the stages of grief. But I think that my ideal is I don't know what it is. And all I know is that I don't want G1 redone. And because G1's been done and it's been reimagined several times, especially in the comics medium. You know, in the quality maybe it's varied, but that's all I really want is just don't do G1 again. And if you do something what I really like about later IDW is that it's rooted in G1, but it is not strictly a G1 story. You know, we've got Beast Wars characters. It has its own original characters. It has, characters from, Prime, Breakdown, Knockout are in there. It's sort of this pan-universal thing that goes into this playground similarly to how Fun Pub did, but not quite as on the nose sometimes. And I really like that. I think there's a lot of room in Transformers to, respectfully use, or expand or reimagine old characters. And I think that it's important for the success of something, and also just putting on the business hat from a marketing perspective. I think it is important that, they do have, Optimus Prime's leading the good guys, and they probably do, marketing wise. I don't know if I would really care to see it, but an evil Megatron again, leading the bad guys. And I do think they probably do need to get back to a war story. And even though I wouldn't pick that myself, if they do it well and it's interesting, hey, that would be cool. So, that's the medium length answer to that is I'm not sure. Just please don't do G1 again, or I might not care.
Darryl, what about you?
Well, we've talked about this quite a bit on transmissions, and the my opinion has been that I think they need to get some new writers, which I think they've decided on. That's been announced that the writers are going to be new unknowns. But when you look at who was popular right now, I mean, James Roberts came from the fan community, and John Barber was editorial, right? So I mean, these guys were both doing other things and came to the writers of Transformers and did fantastic work. So I think if IDW can look outside the box once again, they might find another gem as far as writers go. Art-wise, I think art in Transformers comics is some of the best it's ever been, and I really would hesitate for them to change a lot. You can get these artists to change the style and the way that things look, but really, we've got some of the best artists drawing Transformers right now that I think have ever done it. So I would hope that they would stay. I would really hope that would happen. As far as the story goes, I agree with Scotty that the war needs to come back. I know you don't want it to come back, Scotty, but I think it needs to come back.
Oh yeah, I agree.
It has to happen. It's the Transformers are factions. They're always going to be a faction, characters, and they need to be in a battle. They need to be fighting each other. That's their deal. If you take that away, they're just superheroes without any powers. And they're dealing with everyday life, which is almost to the point of what Lost Light was, and it got, for me personally, it became a very boring book, which depends on who you ask, but it's very complex, but there's no battle, and that's why it became very boring for me. But you bring the battle back, you bring a really interesting take on a story, which is as far as the character count goes, G1 is something that is always going to sell, but I mean, we're getting into a time when Beast era characters and fans are becoming more and more apparent, so you might see a lot more of that. Speculation is that the war for Cybertron toy line is going to influence the comics for the first little bit, so it'll be a Cybertronian look to the characters. which is fine. I mean, that's different, right? So yeah, it would be something like that. But for me, I want battles. I want them fighting. I want them transforming and doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I think those are very fair opinions.
You brought up factions. That reminded me, I'll keep it short. There's a moment in Spotlight Drift where Cup is talking to him, and he mentions that third faction. And I know at the time he meant Circle of Light, but now in context it reads like Nails. And
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it was very, very fun to see.
Yeah, I agree. I saw that too, and I thought Nails.
Yeah. But guys, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much. It was a bit of a bitch to set this up, and as Scotty was saying, he was sitting around waiting for me for an hour, and I was like, I see. So, but guys, thank you.
I do have to plug before we go, because I don't know if I really appropriately have the whole time. Sorry, I know you're trying to wrap it up.
No, you were about to get a plug moment. I always get, there's always a plug moment, so feel free to rush ahead.
It didn't sound like it was coming. Sorry. Yeah. So what I did is I just got up another episode, and then when I was done with that, I was like, okay, when are we going to start? But yeah, you can. It's on the Seibertron.com Twincast podcast. So you can go to Seibertron.com/podcast, or just look up the Twincast podcast on just about any aggregation service of choice: iTunes, Google Play, all that stuff. We go about every 2 weeks for about 2 hours, sometimes 3. If you're hearing me on here, I don't shut the hell up sometimes, so they can go long. But that's where you can check more of it out. And we talk about comics probably a third of the time, toys the other 2/3, and for that final third to make 4/3, just whatever bullshit comes to mind.
Yeah, it's a good show. Check it out. Darryl, since I got interrupted there, you might as well have your moment.
Oh boy, I've been waiting for my moment. Let me call my mom first. Let me tell her my moments here.
Hi, Darryl's mom. We're all very disappointed in him.
You can listen to me on the Transmissions podcast. We record once every week, but it goes into 2 shows every week. It gets broken up. We do a toy-focused show on the regular Transmissions show, and then we have a show that goes up on Fridays. It's Alt Mode, and that's our comics and media show. So we do that. We also have a very rare show that goes up, whenever we get the opportunity to. It's called Transmissions Extra, where we talk about just BS, in the media. Sometimes movies, we'll talk about that, TV shows or something, whatever comes to mind. We have interviews that'll sometimes get their own show. We have they'll get in there. We have a Patreon in which the Patreons of our podcast will get their own show. It's called Transmissions Declassified, and that's where we do like a discussion for about an hour or so on an evergreen topic that can be listened to at any point in time. I just recorded one last week with Chris Vangelis and Echo TF about cleaning and maintenance and repair of your action figures and Transformers to make sure that they stay clean, or if they're broken, how to fix them and maintain them. And it was a really interesting discussion. That hour show
was cool.
Yeah, that hour show went 2.5 hours, so it was it was a good discussion. So that'll go up for our Patreons in the near future. We do one of those a month, so and that's guaranteed. That's our 12th one of those. So we're real busy over there at Transmissions. There's always something going on with me and the guys.
Where are you standing in terms of the actual donators? I'm going to say donators.
Well done.
On the Patreon, because I know you have the once you hit 100, Declassified will become publicly available.
That's right. We are getting. We just ran a contest that we drew a couple weeks ago for our donators. And it was.
He's going to kill you.
Yes, I know. It's fantastic.
Well, by the way,
I read the spotlights at the DMV, and they asked me if I wanted to be a donator.
Yeah. Can I just say, Tom V. Long, if you're listening, well played.
Oh,
played.
Tom's a god. We ran a contest where we gave away 5 different prize packs where I guesstimated their value fairly accurately, I think, to about $1,500 Canadian. We broke it up. We had some really cool stuff. There was a Masterpiece Sunstreaker in there, a Masterpiece Megatron MP36, a bunch of comics, some donated by Tom Belong, which was really nice of him. Some really cool stuff in there, and that was just for our donators. And then we're running another one because some people just join contests. It's just weird. So we're trying to get to that 100 so everyone can get declassified. So we're running a contest that'll end at the end of September, and it's going to be for 3 different prizes, and it's the reissues, the G1 reissues, because we're all G1ers over there on transmissions. And first prize is the G1 Devastator. Second prize is G1 Starscream, and third prize is G1 Bumblebee. So.
Well, you're also in Canada, so you can get them.
Yes, they are everywhere here.
At a fine Canadian brand.
Yeah. Well, that's Walmart.
Yeah.
They're at Walmart here.
Seriously, as an American that doesn't understand the concept of privilege, or I should say understands it but fails to really truly grasp it, it has been very strange in the last year or two to watch Canada start to get everything first.
Hey, it's been nice because I've been having to watch the U.S. have everything, and actually the Philippines gets everything before we all do. So, but I honestly I just talked to the guys on Sunday, and I bought 3 figures over at this Toys R Us store we have here, and one of them was free because they had a sale, which was awesome. So, yeah, we have this really nice Toys R Us store. You should get one.
Wow, yeah. I wonder what that place is like.
It's magical.
Sounds like it.
I don't know, I saw the sign and the R's the wrong way around, and I just don't trust a shop with grammar like that.
Oh, yeah, well.
Yeah, and it's leaves, not leafs.
Is that a hockey joke you're throwing at me?
Yeah.
Oh man, that is my team too. You suck.
Oh man.
I think I've started something.
Don't worry. You had the 0-2 Eastern Conference Finals is all you need to point to just shut me down. I'll be like, oh yeah. Okay.
0-2. I can't picture who your team would be. 0-2.
Oh damn. I feel like that's enough there. Like, who did we beat?
I now have to look it up.
That was the Ron Francis Hurricanes.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That was when everyone in North Carolina realized that there was a hockey team here.
Yeah, you guys have won a Stanley Cup in the last in the last generation or 2 generations.
Yeah, 12 years ago, went to the playoffs one time since, and everyone lost interest. I seriously had season tickets at one point, and they were so bad so long I don't have them anymore.
Oh my god! I mean, Mikey, I know you're cutting all this out, but damn.
No, it'll get in there. I'm just thinking Limerick, my local Irish football team, had its first major win in 50 years, and it shut down the town last week.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I honestly, I've told my family and friends that if Toronto actually did win the Stanley Cup, I'm going to Toronto to riot. It's just, they haven't won the big prize since 1967, and they've been one of the original teams since the beginning. So yeah. if they win, it's just the whole town will be destroyed. I swear to God.
I think they're gonna be good. You know, the funniest thing for any hockey fans listening. The funniest thing you can look up about the Carolina Hurricanes 2006 Stanley Cup victory is the Onions coverage. Because they have, they photoshopped, I think it was Aaron Ward or Mark Recchi holding the cup, but they put a City of Raleigh trash can, from the street in his hand, and then they photoshopped him on, an empty scene of what's actually one of the busier streets downtown here, but, it's for the comedy.
Sure.
And it was basically, because it's North Carolina, that this gang called the Hurricanes won in some sport called hockey, and were going around downtown, and these bearded men were just terrorizing everyone. And
fantastic,
it's really good. Yeah.
Oh my god, I'm going to check that out. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for this. Really enjoyed having this little chat, and believe me, I must do because it's 4:15 in the morning and I'm still awake, so I must have enjoyed it. Guys, thank you so much. You already did your shilling. I'll get the Moonbase 2 shilling out of the way. Obviously, if you're hearing this a week early, you're hearing it on our Patreon, where you can hear shows like this, and our extended comic shows, and our Moonbase Woo Woo, which is our talk about any bullshit we can come up to kind of show. Just $2 a month, you can get all that, and you'll get interviews and stuff a week early. We're going to have, it's not on Patreon, but we are going to have a bit of a text interview with Flame Toys. I got in contact with them, so that should be up there soon. You can follow us on Twitter, you can follow us on Facebook, we're on the various RSS feeds. If you want to leave us any feedback, you can do it on Twitter at TheMoonbase2, or send us an email, themoonbase2@gmail.com. Hope you all...
I hate Razorclaw at Seibertron.com, we'll just forward it over.
Yep. Feel free to swear. On Twitter also, you can send all comments about Moonbase 2, Twincast, or transmissions to @Axmit. I don't know if Aaron listens to these, but I suspect that he's not going to be happy if he does. But yeah, I just want to thank you two again. Really, really enjoyed it. It's been an absolute blast.
No problem. This is fun.
Yeah.
You got me. It proves to the Charles and Jeremy that I actually read comics. They think I'm just the toy guy. I own every single comic, you bastards. Let me do a review.
Listen. Charles doesn't open toys. You don't read comics. We all have our ball. You know, this is the ball we're playing with. This is just life.
Charles has all the balls.
I'm not going down that road. I'm tired, and I'll say something I'll regret. But yeah, everyone, thank you for listening. Keep your eyes out for the next one, where we will move from, I think, less positive material. Because if nothing else, we're hitting the one thing I don't want to talk about.
But hey, Wreckers.
Hey, Wreckers. Well, I've got to get... Amy's going to be on the next one, so at least I've got some company.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, guys, thank you so much.
Alrighty.
And we'll talk to you again. Take care.
Later.